All right, welcome back. This is the Coach Mark Gottfried Show, and I always say that I'm having an absolute blast because of my guests, and I love learning their journeys. I hope you are as well. But today I've got one of the great coaches of all time in college basketball, a guy that I ended up competing against a lot in the ACC, took two different programs to the Final Four. He's been National Coach of the Year, ACC Coach of the Year, and on and on and on and on. So many accolades. But welcome in Jim Larrañaga, formerly the head coach at the University of Miami. Coach, how you doing?
I'm good, Mark. I'm looking forward to talking to you today.
So let's dive in, Coach, because like I mentioned, I always loved competing against your teams because your teams were hard to beat, number one. But let's go all the way back and kind of, fill us in a little bit on, I know you grew up in New York in the Bronx, but kind of that love for basketball for you. Like, where did it come from? When did it start? And kind of just take us all the way back if you could.
Well, I did grow up in the Bronx. I have two older brothers. My brother Bob was a scholarship athlete at St. John's University when they were top 20, top 10 in the country with a bunch of NBA caliber players. And I'd go to Madison Square Garden and watch him play against Ohio State and West Virginia with Jerry West. I went out to St. John's and watched him play home games. And so both my brothers encouraged me to play basketball. I started playing when I was in the fourth grade. I got pretty good, enough that I got a scholarship to Archbishop Malloy High School in Queens, New York. Now, I had to make a commitment, even though it was a scholarship. I had to travel an hour and a half to get to school every morning, an hour and a half by city bus to get home at night. I left my house every morning. I was up at 6:30, left the house at 6:45, and got home about 9:30 every night. And my reason, my high school coach, Jack Curran, who's a Hall of Fame coach and just an inspiration for anybody who liked basketball. When I was a freshman, Mark, my freshman team was 7-0 at Christmas time, doing very well. We went home for Christmas, came back at New Year's, and Coach Curran called me into his office. He called me Larry. He said, "Larry, Brother Edmund quit the Marist order. He's no longer your coach. I need you to coach the freshman team." And I said, "Mr. Curran, you know I'm only 14 years old." And he said, "Yeah, I know, but you'll do a great job. Don't worry about it." You'll have Dick Zeitler, your point guard. He'll help you. We went undefeated and won the city championship my freshman year. And that was it for me. I loved the coaching. I loved my interaction with my teammates. Mr. Curran was my mentor. I got a scholar. He got me a scholarship to Providence College. I played 4 years at Providence, got drafted by the Pistons. Didn't make it with the Pistons, and then Terry Holland offered me an assistant coaching job. I was only 21 years old when I started coaching. And I worked at Davidson for 5 years.
That's amazing. Coach, how about this one? Because you had, obviously, you have a great background, but I know Terry Holland was a big-time influence on you, but some of the guys, you mentioned your high school coach, but we all have people that have helped us. We all have people that have kind of given us a chance or, we learned from. And who are some of those guys for you? I've always been curious for the guys maybe that had the biggest kind of implant where they put their kind of fingerprints and then you took it and ran with it as a coach.
Well, of course, Coach Curran was the first. But my next coach at Providence College was Joe Mullaney. And he was a fantastic coach. After my sophomore year, he was so good. His next job was to be the head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers. Right. They hired him in 1969. He was replaced by one of the great entrepreneurs of college basketball history, and that was Dave Gavitt. Oof. Dave Gavitt came to Providence College, coached for 10 years, took Providence to the Final Four, but then he became an administrator, first AD at Providence College, and then he's the founder of the Big East Conference. Right. He had a tremendous influence on me because he was never just a basketball coach. He had his hands in everything. He was like the commissioner of a softball league when he was the assistant at Providence College before he became the head coach. right? And when he was the AD, can you imagine being the coach and AD, and then being the AD at one of the conference schools where you're the commissioner? He was the commissioner of the Big East and the AD at Providence at the same time. But the respect that his peers had for him, John Thompson, Lou Conaseca, Rolly Massimino, all the guys, Jim Boeheim, Jim O'Brien, who was at Boston College, he created a major player by creating the Big East and then taking a chance by signing up to be the flagship league for the newly founded ESPN television network. Mm-hmm. And so he had a tremendous influence on me. It's why, and you know this, why when I became the head coach at Bowling Green and there wasn't that much interest and I needed to drum up some interest, I started the Junior Falcons.
That's right.
And that was a basketball league for young kids in town. And you did a similar thing when you were at, Murray State?
I remember talking to you about that years and years ago, the Junior Falcons. I loved it.
Yeah, so when I got out of college, Terry Holland hired me, and everything I learned from him was about creating a culture of family. His relationship with his players was second to none. And I watched Ralph Sampson, who was a 3-time National Player of the Year. He actually spent his sophomore year living in Coach Holland's house. Wow. Coach Holland had a beautiful home in Charlottesville across the street from the arena. And Ralph lived in the basement, which was really like having your own apartment. But that was the kind of closeness that he had with all of his players. And I try to simulate that, emulate that with my own coaching career.
You know, Coach, when you mention those names, and for the basketball fans that pay attention and watch this show, you know, it'll resonate. That's like the Mount Rushmores. You know, you were around some great people. But talk a little bit too, for me, Coach, like when you're younger and you're watching these personalities in the Big East, like you mentioned that, Dave Gavitt created the league, and there were so many personalities at that time. You know, I wasn't living in the East. You know, I was in the South and grew up in Ohio, but then in the South. But from a distance, I always watched, and it was amazing. And they almost took advantage and promoted those personalities because they were so big. How was that for you, watching all that as a younger coach and younger person involved with basketball?
Well, I was friends with all those guys. I knew them from a very young age. You know, John Thompson played at Providence College 5-6 years before I did. Lou Conaseca recruited me out of high school because he recruited my brother Bob. Jim Boeheim and I are the same generation. We actually played against each other in a tournament in Binghamton, New York, after my senior year in college. So when he was an assistant at Syracuse, I was an assistant at Davidson, and we'd run into each other on the road. So all those guys in the Big East, Jim O'Brien, the head coach of Boston College, we played against each other in high school, became best friends in college, and are still best friends to this day. I talk to OB all the time. So when one of the funny things, Gary Williams, who was a terrific coach at American University, Boston College, Ohio State, and Maryland, Gary Williams was at Ohio State when I was at Bowling Green, and he helped me get the George Mason job in 1997. Wow. So I knew all those guys. They all had their own unique personalities. You know, John Thompson was bigger than life. Lou Conaseca was the Energizer Bunny. Everybody, he was like the Pied Piper. Everyone loved Lou. So you had all these different kinds of personalities and people. And John Thompson was someone very, very different from me. I got to say, he was very much about money. Like one of the things that he was a brand, right? So wherever he went, wherever he spoke, whatever he did, there was probably some kind of financial success to it. And so me, I was the opposite. I did everything for free. I just wanted to help people. And I am still very much that way. It's one of the reasons I walked away from coaching.
Interesting, Coach. So I think most people will remember the run you had at Miami. which was amazing. We'll talk about that. I'm going to dive into it because I got a lot of good questions for you. They'll remember the great run at George Mason in a Final Four, which America just was captured. Everybody was interested in your team. But for me, I go back and look at the run you had at Bowling Green. And, you know, the Mid-American Conference is such a great league. It was one of the leagues, and I'd love to hear your take on this, Coach, because from a distance, I always felt like, you know, some leagues, some teams have way more of an advantage than the others, you know, whether it's tradition or facilities, whatever it may be. And you maybe look at like Gonzaga in the WCC and, you know, Carolina and Duke for a little bit in the ACC. But the Mid-American Conference, and you were at Bowling Green, it just kind of seemed like everybody kind of had a chance. Everybody did. Everybody was good. And so for you to be really good in that league, you were competing against everything being somewhat equal. Would you agree with that, or maybe I'm wrong in that take?
Well, we were a little bit behind in terms of resources and financial support than many of the teams in the league. But I think the level of play in the Mid-American Conference at that time was far higher than people could appreciate. So when I first got into the league, you remember the PIT, the Portsmouth Invitational, where they invite the top 64 seniors. So Yale Dorsey ran that. I played in it. My team won the championship. And Yale, who ran it, he'd call me every year and ask me about this player or that player, how good they were. And so my first year at Bowling Green, he was asking me about all the former players from the ACC. And I said to him, look, at the Mid-American Conference got some great players too. Are you going to invite anybody from our league? And he said, no. And I said, well, Yale, you better track down Dan Marley and Grant Long. Dan Marley is from Central Michigan. Grant Long is from Eastern Michigan. And those guys are not only NBA players, they're like top NBA type guys. And Dan Marley, that got him invited to the PIT. He won MVP. He went to Chicago or Phoenix someplace, won the MVP there. John Thompson put him on the Olympic team. He's a first-round draft choice of the Phoenix Suns and a legend. Right? Grant Long, he got invited to the PIT because of my recommendation. He played like 14 years in the league. So the league was so strong. One of the things I found, though, because of the lack of exposure, we were a one-bid league, I started writing to all my friends in the NBA and telling them they needed to scout the league much better. And I made a list of guys that I know you'll know these things. So I had a player, Antonio Daniels.
Good.
He wasn't ranked in the top 100 seniors, not top 100. Earl Boykins, not listed in the top 100. Bonzi Wells was like a top 80 or 60 guy. We had Casey Shore at Toledo. We had the year before, we had Gary Trent, the Shaq and the Mac.
That's right.
These guys were great players. Rick Carlisle is one of my former players from Virginia. He was the assistant with the Portland Trailblazers. I just called him about Gary Trent, and I said, hey, Rick, you know, I don't know what you're looking for. You got a first-round pick. This guy, Gary Trent's going to be a great NBA player. Now, again, I think he only made the All-Star team once, or maybe he didn't make it at all. But he had himself a heck of a career. Bonzi Wells did, Antonio Daniels. Earl Boykins played in the league for 14 years. That was the MAC.
And the MAC was good. And people that in the basketball world knows it's good. Coach, you were there for, I think, was it 10 or 11? How many years were you at Bowling Green?
11.
11 years. And you made the move from there to George Mason. Talk about that a little bit, because I think, you know, Bowling Green's a really good basketball job. The MAC's a good league. And with the success you had at Bowling Green, maybe a lot of people would have thought that next job would have been, you know, maybe in the ACC or the Big Ten or the back to the Big East, wherever it may be. But yours was to George Mason. Talk about that and kind of what was going through your mind when you made that move.
Well, the first thing is I was very interested in getting back on the East Coast. I enjoyed my time at Bowling Green, but I'm not born and raised in the Midwest. I'm born and raised in New York City. I have all my contacts from my years at Davidson in Virginia on the East Coast. I wanted to get back to recruiting what is known as the DMV, the District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia. And so when several jobs opened up on the East Coast, and George Mason was one of them, I looked at it, and they had just finished their 7th consecutive losing season. They lost 7. They finished last, I believe, 4 years in a row. And I thought to myself, okay, I've learned as much as I can building a program at Bowling Green, but we're probably not going to be able to do much more. We got to the NIT. We won the regular season championship in year 11. I applied for the George Mason job. I got an interview. And when I interviewed actually with the president of the university, he absolutely sold me that this was the place. Because he said to me, Mark, I don't know if you've ever had a president say this to you, but he said to me, Coach L, if you take this job, if you come here to George Mason, I want you to know what my vision is. We have 24,000 students. We're a state university, but we're not in the category of Virginia or Virginia Tech in terms of notoriety. I want to become the largest state university in the state of Virginia. I want 40,000 students. And the way to do that is through marketing and branding. And our only revenue producing sport is men's basketball. You come here, I'm going to be 100% behind you. And the two of us are going to build George Mason into a great university and athletic program. So that was music to my ears. And then he followed up with that, Mark. The first month I was on the job, he called me at home and said, Coach L, would you and your wife like to join my wife and I and attend the Businessman Hall of Fame in Washington, D.C.? There'll be 600 of the most successful businessmen in our community. I'd like you to meet them. And it's their Hall of Fame. 6 or 8 of them are being honored. And I said, hell yeah. And he said, do you own a tuxedo? I said, no, I'll rent one. He said, no, buy one. We're going to do this regularly. So you can imagine when the president of your university, he puts himself, I hadn't coached a game yet, Mark. He didn't know if we were going to win or lose, but he made that first commitment to me. And I knew I needed to return that favor, and we did.
You know, and what was his name, Coach, the president?
Dr. Alan Merton. He has since passed away, but we worked together for 14 years. And really, one of my motivations for leaving is he called me during the Final Four in 2011 and said, Coach L, I'm retiring. And my eyes lit up, and I turned to my wife and said, you know, a new president, first of all, could bring in football. We didn't have football. He could de-emphasize men's basketball and start, you know, emphasizing other areas of the university. So I called one of my friends, Frank Haith had just resigned at the University of Miami, took the Missouri job. So I have a friend, he and his brother actually own Inter Miami, the Major League Soccer. They didn't own it then, but they own their own company called Mas Tech. And so I called Jose Mas, who's a dear friend of mine. I told him I'd be very interested in the job. He reached out to several members of the Board of Trustees. The president, I had Arnie Duncan. Do you know that name? Mm-hmm. Arnie Duncan, former Secretary of Education, is a friend of mine. I had him reach out to President Donna Shalala, who's a Democrat, who was in Bill Clinton's cabinet. Arnie was in Barack Obama's cabinet, so they had a lot in common. Arnie reached out to President Shalala. Doc Rivers, who's a good friend of mine, he reached out to the AD. And pretty soon, between Jose Mas, Doc Rivers, and Arnie Duncan, I got the job at Miami.
Wow. Isn't that great? Coach, go back a minute to George Mason, because I can only imagine, listening to you talk about the relationship you had with the president, his vision. I've never had one like that, by the way. I don't think a lot of coaches have had a president like you did there. And the relationship that you had, but you did a great job there. You had a phenomenal run as the head coach at George Mason, but 2006, I think, if I get this right, 2006, you guys made the run all the way to the Final Four, which I want to talk about the Final Four run, but listening to you talk about that, I can only imagine how proud and excited your president was as your team made that run and you were getting all that, national attention, which he talked about. Talk about that between you and him and during the run to the Final Four.
Well, as I said, it started immediately, our relationship. And then he decided to start what I'll call a tradition, that every Sunday we would meet at the Country Club of Fairfax and have brunch together with several deans and trustee members. And so every Sunday, my wife and I would go to the Country Club. We sit and would discuss university business.
Wow.
How to build a university. Then when the basketball team really went on a roll, and in 2005, we knew we were going to have a terrific team, but that doesn't mean you're going to make the NCAA tournament, doesn't mean you're going to get to the Final Four. When we got invited to the NCAA tournament, our first round opponent was Michigan State, Tom Izzo, a team that had gotten to the Final Four the year before and had 4 starters back. So we were a complete underdog. My president, he didn't care. He was behind us 100%, win or lose. He never once in 14 years of working together ever made a suggestion about basketball. We never talked about basketball. We talked about leadership and teamwork and how to work together to build a culture. And just like he envisioned 24,000 students he wanted to turn into 40,000, Google it right now. George Mason is the largest state university in the state of Virginia, and we did that together. So when we got to the NCAA tournament, he wasn't watching on TV. He was on the team bus flying with us. And meeting with people, creating a brand for the university. So we played the University of Connecticut in the Elite Eight, the winner going to the Final Four. Now, Connecticut was the number 1 seed in the tournament. They had 5 starters that were all NBA draft choices that year. So we beat UConn. Now, understand this. The game was played at the Verizon Center in downtown Washington, D.C., 16 miles from the George Mason campus in Fairfax, Virginia. All right. So we're busing back to campus. President Merton is sitting right by my side. And as we pull into campus, it's a big hill. The student center, it's called the Johnson Center, sits up on a hill. And as we turn the corner to go forward towards the arena, fireworks are going off. Like it's 4th of July. And I turned to him and I said to him, President Merton, how in the world did you organize that in like the last hour? You know what he said? Oh, I didn't organize it the last hour. I organized it during the week. I planned on doing it whether we won another game or not. Because one of the great parts of winning, of creating the environment and the culture you have, is you have to celebrate it. You have to enjoy that moment because you don't know how long it'll last. So we beat Wichita State in the Sweet 16. We beat Connecticut. We come home to fireworks. The next thing, we're off to Indianapolis for the Final Four. He's sitting right next to me the whole time. That's
amazing, Coach. That's an unbelievable journey that you guys had together. So now the next move comes, which for me, I've always kind of through the years, you look at University of Miami basketball, and they had a few moments here and there. It was one of those where here and there, and you're in Coral Gables and the sun's shining, and people aren't really as interested in basketball there. Football at one time, as we all know, was they were so good, and Jimmy Johnson and all that. But you decide to take that job, and that's not a perennial school that's been in Final Fours and national championships and any of that type of stuff. And so did you see that as just this amazing challenge to see, okay, we're going to take this thing and kind of turn this whole ship around?
Okay, you have to go back to the early years of my Bowling Green career to know what was going through my mind. I spent 7 glorious years at the University of Virginia in the ACC, 4 of those years with Ralph Sampson being ranked in the either number 1 in the country or top 3 or 4 in the country for 4 years. I worked for one of the greatest guys in Terry Holland. I worked side by side with Dave Odom, a tremendous college coach at Wake Forest, Craig Littlepage, who was not only a great friend, still is a great friend of mine, but I had the greatest time spending time with Craig Littlepage, Dave Odom, and Terry Holland. So my dream and goal when I left the University of Virginia was to be a head coach in the ACC. So even though it was very difficult for me, in 2008, I was offered the head coaching job at my alma mater, Providence College, and I turned it down because in my mind, the ACC is the best league. That's where my next move is going to be. So when the University of Miami opened up, it was at a perfect time because the president of George Mason was retiring. And my friends in Miami were able to help me. You have to have a network of people, otherwise you're not going to get the job. The search firms do their due diligence, but you have to have people on the inside working for you, and I did. I looked at the University of Miami this way. It's in the best basketball league in the country. It's tremendous academically. It's a private school. It like George Mason, I could see the potential. I thought the potential was there. And I felt like, again, we had built the culture at George Mason that I really was proud of. And I wondered to myself, could we, my staff and I, do it again, but at the ACC high major level? And we did. I was excited to take it over and knew that I'd be banging heads with Roy Williams and Mike Krzyzewski and some of the great coaches in college basketball history.
Coach, let me ask you this one, because I think you did an unbelievable job. I think it's going to be hard for somebody to match, what you did at Miami. And for all the reasons you just said, like it's got great potential, but it's also a difficult job in my view. A lot of places, in college basketball, you have a built-in, even when I was at NC State, and their fans are passionate, but on a bad night, you're having 12,000, and on a good night, it's 18 or 19,000. It's somewhere in there. But Miami didn't really have that following in basketball, but it never seemed to, be an obstacle for you. You guys just played right through that. Now you had it really rolling in certain games. If Duke rolled in there or something, it's a sellout. But there were times when I was at NC State, we're competing against you guys. And you got really, really good teams, like really good teams with really good players. And sometimes we would go down there and maybe the arena is kind of half full, but you just kind of put your head down, in my opinion, and I'm trying to say this in the right way, but the fan base, you didn't have a built-in base like a lot of schools do. Would you agree with that? And then kind of it didn't seem it was ever an issue for you. You just rolled right through it and still built great teams on top of that.
Well, here's the thing. No job is perfect. Right. Everybody doesn't have everything where everything's in place to help you. I knew what I was walking into. But here's what I'll tell you, and this is funny because it happened before I took the job. I was interested in the job. I was talking to Miami, and I did a little research talking to my friends. And they said, well, you don't want to take that job. And I said, why not? They said, number one, you'll never beat Duke or Carolina. Number two, you'll never win the ACC regular season or tournament. And number three, you're never going to draw crowds. It's not a basketball community. Maybe football does well there, but basketball's never even been that important because, Mark, We didn't even have a basketball program from 1972 to 1985.
Right.
They dissolved the basketball program in the 70s and 80s. But I knew all that. So, but one of my goals was, okay, how do we overcome the obstacles? What are the roadblocks in our way? And I'm very proud to say the first thing was we won half our games against Carolina and half our games against Duke during my 14 years. Number two, we won the ACC regular season a couple of times. We won the ACC tournament as well. And number three, we had three back-to-back seasons with sellout crowds. Now, we couldn't sustain that, partially because of issues beyond my control, partially because of COVID. And then even these last couple of years, we didn't win as much as I expected or the university hoped for. So, yeah, I think Jay Lucas, who's the new head coach, and his staff, I think they'll do a great job. They're off to a great start in recruiting. They've got some very good players coming in. But you know this, it's much harder to build a culture under this NIL portal era.
Well, we're going to get into that in a second, but let me ask you this one, Coach, before we talk about it, because I've always been curious. You and I've never asked you this question, and we were, we competed, we sat in meetings, we were always around, but you're competing against somebody. But I don't know that in my years as a head coach, I think I was head coach for 22 or 24 years as a head coach in Division I basketball. I don't think that any of my teams ever played against another program or a coach that utilized the ball screen, pick and roll as well as you did. Everybody, it's involved in everybody's offense one way or another. Everybody, in pick and roll in basketball, it's as old as time. But you guys just did a great job with that over and over and over and over. I used to tell our teams, you better get ready to guard not one, not two, not three, not four ball screens every possession. You guys just were so good at that. Like, where did that kind of originate for you as well? Because I think that separated you a little bit from a lot of the other guys that we went against.
Okay, so my great belief as a coach is utilize your strengths, and while you're working on your weaknesses, don't let the opponent exploit those. So when I was an assistant under Terry Holland, we ran the flex and 4 out, 1 in. That was it. Very, very simple basketball. When I got to Bowling Green, I expanded a little bit. I ran the flex. I ran 4 out and 1 in. I started to experiment a little bit with ball screens. As my career moved on and I got to George Mason, we had really good guards. And so we started to utilize ball screens. I won't say a ton more, but in terms of percentages, if our offense was geared towards ball screens, it was probably about 30 or 40%. But in my last year at George Mason, we were recruiting a point guard who I observed his style of play. I went and watched him, went to his home to talk to he and his parents, trying to convince him that he should come to George Mason. And I had this vision in mind if we did get him. So I went to the house. His name is Shane Larkin. And his dad was Barry Larkin, Hall of Fame baseball player. So I go to the home and I say during the conversation, I said, look, at Shane, if you come to George Mason, I believe you'll end up in the NBA. And his dad stopped me, right? Wait a minute, you're telling me you think my son's an NBA player? I said, no, that's not exactly what I said. And he said, well, I just heard you. I said, no. I said, if he comes and plays for me. He said, okay, what's so special about you? I said, no, it's what's so special about your son. I watched him play. He's absolutely a genius, a tactician that can run a ball screen as good as anybody in the country. If he goes someplace that runs the triangle offense or the flex or motion, he's average. He comes and plays for me, he'll be great. Because I'll give him 4 and 5 ball screens every possession. So what did he do, Mark? He signed with DePaul. And that spring, I left and became the head coach of Miami. Shane Larkin called me in August of my first summer there and said, I just got a release from DePaul. I'm transferring. Would you be interested in me? And I said, absolutely. He said, you remember you told me I was an ACC player, maybe even an NBA player? I said, yes. Do you really believe that? I said, absolutely. He said, do you need a point guard? I said, yes, we do. Calm down. And what did we do? We ran more ball screens for that young man that you can count. And how good was he?
I'd have headaches. On the coaching. We'd be ready to, in practice, we're getting ready to play your teams. And I remember our guys, and I would tell like the scout team, I said, you're going to run a ball screen in that slot on this side. You're going to run one over there, and then you're going to run over here, and you just keep running them. I mean, and we got to either go over, under, trap them, blitz them. I mean, we were trying everything. But and if we were ever able to be successful trying to guard that, because he was so good, Shane Larkin, that if your defender went under, he just stayed right behind it and shot it, made it. If you go over it, he'd turn the corner. If you trap it, he'd just knife you. I mean, but that was for me as a head coach, Division I head coach, the first time I competed against a player that was that good in the ball screen, but then a coach that just kept it just over and over, and you guys were so good at it. So good. It was unbelievable. The best my team's ever had to go against in defending ball screens was against you guys.
Well, one of my favorite stories, because when Shane Larkin was 2 and done, he wasn't even ranked in the top 100 in high school. He was like 118. But he was so good at the ball screen. So what that did is high school coaches and high school players were watching us. There was a player at Kansas State named Angel Rodriguez who played against Shane in high school and thought he was every bit as good as Shane. But they played a different style at Kansas State. So Angel transfers, and he ends up replacing Shane. So now we're playing Duke, and they got it's their national championship team with Okafor and a left-handed kid who was a 10th player chosen. They got the 2 guards, Quinn Cook and one of the Trey Jones, one of the Jones brothers. Anyway, we have to play them. They got Emil Jefferson and Okafor up front. We have Tanya Jakiri and Kamari Murphy. And I tell Angel, look at Jahlil Okafor, maybe the top pick in the draft, top 5 pick, but we're going to put him in 100 ball screens today and see if he can guard them. Right? And so we start the game. We get up like 10-4. We've already had Okafor in like 10 ball screens. Well, Coach K, he's brilliant. We're sending Tanya Jakiri out. They send Emil Jefferson. To switch as we're flashing our big. They're switching and having a meal guard. So I signal to him, and you know what this means. Horns. And I just tell Angel, it doesn't matter who Okafor is guarding. Just use his man and create. And we beat him 93. I think we beat them by 93 to 80 or something. And they won the national championship that year. But Coach K never sent me a thank you letter. But I think I helped them win the national championship.
That's good.
You know why? You know what happened his very next game? You know what he did the next game? They played Louisville on the road. He zoned. And he added a zone to his defensive arsenal. And every few minutes or every few games, he'd switch and go zone and would throw the other team off because they never zoned. And they ended up making the NCAA tournament, the deep run. They used the zone to win the national title.
That's funny.
It was very funny to me.
That's great, Coach. Well, you and I could talk about the ball screen for hours because I loved how you guys did it. All right, let's jump ahead, Coach, because I'm dying to hear your take on this. And, I've had so many coaches on here, guys like yourself that were really successful that have maybe stepped away. And, in basketball and football, I've had Jimbo Fisher and Dabo Sweeney and Jay Wright and Gary Williams, and the list goes on and on and on, and Nate Oates and Bruce Pearl. But for you, Coach, and watching this massive landscape change in college athletics, we've never seen the change that we've seen in the last couple of years. There's always been tweaks and changes and rule changes and this and that, and that's part of what we all had to, you roll along with it. But here comes NIL, and then here comes the portal where kids are allowed to transfer every year without sitting out a year. I think they now can transfer up to 4 times without having to sit out. NIL, name, image, and likeness, where college athletes can receive compensation. But for you at your age, and you had this unbelievable run, so much success, how was that for you to adapt to this whole new, world with really wild, wild west, in my opinion?
Well, first of all, I was enjoying coaching college basketball so much. I loved being in the ACC. I loved, the success we were enjoying. I also felt like, okay, we just did back-to-back years of pretty spectacular basketball. In 2022, we make the Elite Eight. We lead Kansas by 6 at the half and have a hell of a shot at winning the game, but Kansas and Bill Self do a great job in the second half. They win. So we're probably not going to be able to duplicate that. But we go to the transfer portal. We bring in 2 guys that are perfect fits for our basketball program. They come in and play great. We're not very big. Our starting lineup was 6 feet, 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", 6'6". We win the ACC regular season, and we make our run to the Final Four. Now, we lose to the eventual national champion in the University of Connecticut. Okay, so now we fly home on Sunday, and I meet with the individuals on the team to kind of organize a celebration. 8 guys walked in and told me they were putting their name in the portal. One after the other, 8 guys who could return. And I'm like, don't you like it? Oh, I loved it. The Final Four was awesome. But money talks. My agent, my high school coach, my AAU coach are telling me how much money I can make. And we had a few guys who were making money. Nigel Pack, it was all over the internet that he was making $400,000. But we had 11 guys not making a dime, not a penny. So I didn't know what to do about that. It changed my thinking. It discouraged me. I had a tremendous fire in me, and that kind of threw a bucket of cold water on me. But I tried. I did it for a year, and then, okay, I'll give it one more try. But what was going on was getting worse and worse, the amount of money. I spoke to an agent. Actually, to start with, one of my players walked in. We didn't have the budget that's there today. So just, let's say in theory, the budget was $2 million. I had a player walk into me and said, I'll stay, but it'll cost $1 million. So if I give a player $1 million when I have $2 million to work with, how am I going to put together a team? Because all these other guys are going to expect some money. So if you give 2 more guys, let's say you give $500,000 to each, now you got $2 million spent, but you only have 3 guys. Still not going to be any good. So I couldn't balance in my own life the theories and philosophies of the portal and NIL. Because separately, if you look at what NIL was intended to do, I'm all in favor of that. But that's not the way it was operating. It was definitely pay for play. People were just paying players. You're good. You started at another team. You average 15 a game. We'll pay you $1 million. This year, Mark, and I'm not in it as closely, but I'm hearing kids are getting $3 and $4 million.
Oh yeah.
That was not something. My personality and my philosophy and and teaching style. What somebody last night, I don't know if you know the name David Gregory.
Mm.
You know, he was the host of Meet the Press.
Oh, yeah.
Tremendous broadcaster in politics. I was at a dinner with him last night, and his way he said to me, he said, yeah, Coach L, I understand you stepping down because you're one of those culture guys. You like to build a culture. It's a foundation. So a guy like Isaiah Wong comes in as a freshman. He's okay. Sophomore year, he's a good bit better. Junior year, he's all conference. And senior year, he's leading us to the Final Four, and he's ACC Player of the Year. He couldn't do that as a young player. He would not have been with us. He would not have stayed because the money he would have been offered to go someplace else.
Coach, what do you think? I'm curious to hear your opinion on this one because, you know, I have my own opinions, but I think most coaches agree that, you know, if the players can receive some compensation or money and true name, image, and likeness was what it was meant to be, although that's not what it is. But the money side of it, okay, we get that part. But then the portal side where they're transferring every single year. But what do you think we've lost a little bit? There's always good and bad. The gain is kids can make some money, which is great. I had players years ago at Alabama and even NC State that would have done really well and made a lot of money and maybe changed, you know, some trajectory for them. But what would you say is the real, in your mind, the downside? What have we lost in this new landscape of college athletics?
Okay, I'm going to use two young ladies at our university, the Cavender twins. Do you know that name, Mark? So I consider them friends. I've talked to them and sat with them about their NIL. So they really make money off of endorsing products. They are true NIL benefactors. They benefit from their relationships. And I think it's a fantastic way for kids to graduate from college and move into the business world. You see how the business works. Just giving kids money and saying you're playing basketball. Well, to me, that means you're a professional athlete. No amateurism anymore. And when you lose the amateur status, there needs to be more of a professional approach then. We need to be much more like the NBA. There needs to be transparency, which there isn't. I had an agent tell me, hey, if you want to recruit this kid, it'll cost you $1 million. I've had 5 schools that have already offered $1 million. I found out there's nobody offering him $1 million. That guy was trying to hook me. And I had another agent who said to me, look, I have a player at another school. He's having a great year. He's at a low major, but he's going to put his name into the portal in March. And I want to know if you'd be interested. And I was like, it's December. He's played like 5 or 6 games, 7 games, and he's already thinking about leaving his school where he's having a great year so he can make more money. And then I talked to a friend of mine. I asked him what he was doing about NIL in the portal. And he said, well, we have a whole staff. Now, I don't mean 2 or 3 guys. I mean, I'll say a dozen who are now watching every league in the country from the start of the season through the entire season and evaluating every player. So if they put their name into the portal, they already got their to-do list of, are we going after that guy or not? They already have them rated. So we're after a point guard. Where would this kid rate in our point guard? Well, we have 300 names in there. The top 10 are this, the next 10 are that. Maybe we can't get them because they're going to the high majors. And I'm like, holy Christmas. So what is missing really is about building a culture and building a team. And I mean building it. And I just had a player write me the greatest note about one of the reasons he stuck with my program. And he basically said, Coach, I always felt like an equal, that you treated everybody, whether he was the leading scorer, a starter, a guy in the rotation, or like me, one of the last guys on the team, you were always complimenting me. You're always giving me credit where credit was due. You one time called me into your office and told me that I'm as much a contributor to our success as the guy who just scored 20 points. You wrote my dad and told him that I just benched 285 pounds in the weight room. He said, that meant the world to me, that I was someone that you valued. It wasn't that I was just a lowly practiced player, a guy sitting on the bench who never got in. There is no more of that. And I sensed it. I had 10 new players for my last year. They weren't that interested in listening to what I had to say. They were more interested in telling me, this is what I bring to the table. How are you going to take advantage of it?
You know, Coach, it kind of breaks my heart because, you know, I look back even when I was at Murray State in Alabama, and, you know, it's just like you did, you know, and you recruit a guy. A lot of times we recruit guys for 2 or 3 years. You know, they start as a sophomore or maybe even a freshman, or, you know, you're starting to watch them sophomore year, junior year of high school, and then they come play for you, and then they stay 3 or 4 years. Now you've had this like 6 or 7 year window with these young guys that now as they get older, you have this, I still do, and you do, you have this great relationship with these guys that I think now when I talk to coaches, I talked to one of the women's coaches that went to at UCLA, the head coach, Corey Close, and they go to the Final Four, and 6 players go in the portal right after they get home. And all 6 of them announce their next destination within a day. So they've been working on this for a while, but it makes me sad, really, that I don't know that we can have those big, long relationships. And I'm sure you did with all your players. It was probably one of the things you cherished the most about coaching. We all want to win, but I think we've lost some of that. Do you agree with that?
So I'm going to tell you, when I stepped away from coaching, I wanted to occupy my time some way, and I'm writing a book. It's very important to me. And my literary agent said, well, you know, it would be good if you try to get some exposure beyond your coaching career. So I started working on social media. I do a post just about every day. I have 2 of them. One I call Timeout, where I'm asking the audience, timeout, if you were the coach, which option would you choose, A, B, or C? And then I give them 3 options of things that happen to a college basketball coach, and they get a chance to not only choose, because they can hit me back in comments, but they can also, you know, tell me what they think beyond my 3 suggestions. And then I do one called True Story, which is about my former players. So when I post those, my former players are all over that, and I don't mention anybody's name. I don't want to offend anybody. So one of the true stories I told, the guy hit me back in a text message saying, I know that last true story was about me. And, you know, he hasn't played for me in 25 years. I had another guy who hasn't played for me since my Bowling Green days, and he texts me all the time. So I love, you know, staying in touch with my former players. I talked to one of my former players the other night, and I told him I was writing a book, and the first thing he says, oh, please, I hope you're not telling that story about the fight I got into.
Well, Coach, you've had an unbelievable run, and man, congratulations on your career. It's been phenomenal. I feel blessed that I was able to compete with our teams against your teams. You guys were always so good and hard to beat, and God, whenever we'd beat your teams, I'd be like, whew, just get me out of that meat grinder because we were going to be in it. But anyway, Coach, I just want to say thank you for spending some time. And, again, you've been a great friend. You've always been so great to me over the years. So I just want to thank you for being on the show today. It's been phenomenal. And I look forward to your book coming out and all your social media. And anyway, just thank you so much, Coach.
Well, tell your audience at Canes Coach L. That's my Twitter, and at Jim Larrañaga. That's my Instagram. So I hope that we made some friends today.
We absolutely did, Coach. Thank you so much, Jim Larrañaga. Thank you, Coach.